I still remember the way Poe walked into the dark. He never looked back. He just kept walking, calm and unhurried, like a man in a dream, like he could hear a voice the rest of us could not. I tried to call his name, but something crushed the breath in my throat. My legs would not move. All I could do was watch him disappear between the trees, until the darkness swallowed him whole. At first light, we searched. We found the traps he had secretly brought with him. Some had been crushed flat, others were twisted apart as if something enormous had trampled them in the night. But we never found Poe. Not then. Not ever. There were 4 of us. Me, On, Ton, and Poe. It was the school break after our final exams, and Poe had been pushing for this camping trip for weeks. He said he knew the forest well. His father had brought him there when he was young, and he knew shortcuts into places ordinary tourists could never reach. At the time, that sounded exciting. I did not yet understand what Poe meant when he said he knew the forest. We left home at 5 in the morning and reached the trailhead around 8. From there, we hiked for more than 3 hours before reaching the clearing Poe had chosen. Dense, humid jungle surrounded us. A narrow stream ran nearby. Birdsong came from every direction. The place was so beautiful that I had nearly filled my phone with photos before we even pitched the tents. Poe dropped his pack and said he wanted to scout the area. On went with him. Ton and I stayed behind to set up camp and build a fire. When Poe returned, the shoulder bag at his side looked lighter than before. I did not ask why. That night, the 4 of us sat around the fire, drinking coffee, telling jokes, and listening to the forest. It felt like a perfect night. I still remember every detail, though not for the reason I expected to. Around midnight, a sound came from the trees behind us. It was not an animal stepping on dry branches. It was not the wind. I could not tell what it was. It almost sounded like someone walking very slowly, except the steps were spaced impossibly far apart. Too much time passed between each footfall for any human stride. "Did you hear that?" On lifted his head. I nodded. Poe barely reacted. "A deer, nothing unusual. Don't get jumpy." The sound stopped on its own, and eventually we went to bed. But I lay awake longer than the others. I did not believe we had heard a deer. I woke early the next morning and went to the stream to wash my face. When I came back, Poe was gone. He returned half an hour later with empty hands and a blank expression. When I asked where he had been, he said, "Just stretching my legs," but there was mud on the knees of his clothes. A fresh scratch ran nearly to his elbow. Tucked beneath his belt was a small brown cloth pouch I had never seen before. One side was dark and still damp. That afternoon, Poe said he was going into the forest to check something. I offered to come with him. He told me not to bother. I followed him anyway, staying far enough back that he would not notice. After about 150 meters, Poe stopped beneath a large tree. He crouched beside a hollow in its roots, moved aside a pile of carefully placed branches, and reached inside. What he pulled out was still moving. It was about as long as my arm, curled tightly into itself, its body covered in golden brown scales. I recognized it from wildlife documentaries. A pangolin, a protected animal worth tens of thousands on the black market for every kilogram. Poe turned it over with the ease of someone who had done this before. He checked its size and weight, then murmured to himself, "This one will do." He took out his phone, typed a short message, and reached into his pocket for a folding knife. I was less than 10 meters away. I saw everything. The sound that followed was brief. I still hear it sometimes. When I forced myself to look again, Poe was wrapping what remained in a clean cloth bag, the same kind as the stained pouch beneath his belt that morning. Then he put away his phone and walked back toward camp as calmly as if he had picked vegetables from a garden. I stood alone among the trees, unable to decide what to do. In the end, I followed him back without saying a word. That evening, I opened the small bag Poe had left outside his tent. Inside were several lengths of snare wire, some already used, and others still neatly coiled. There was a folding knife, sharp enough to shave with, and a pair of rubber gloves for handling whatever he caught without leaving traces behind. I closed the bag. I said nothing. I knew what I should have done, and I did not do it. I still carry the guilt of that silence. Everything began to change on the second night. It was a little after 10. On was washing the dishes. Ton and I were talking beside the fire. Poe sat a short distance away, facing the tree line. He had been staring at the same place for far too long. "Someone is standing over there." His voice was barely more than a breath. I followed his gaze. At the edge of the forest, about 30 meters beyond the fire, a shape stood where the light could not reach. I stared until my eyes hurt, trying to convince myself it was a tree. But its outline was too straight, too rigid. Trees do not stand like that. "Hey, is someone there?" Ton shouted. The sudden noise made On flinch and drop a plate. Nothing answered. I grabbed a flashlight and swept the beam across the tree line. It caught branches, grass, and bare earth. Nothing else. "Just a tree," On said. "Moisture on the leaves can play tricks with the light." But Poe kept staring at the same empty place. His lips moved faintly, as if he were whispering to himself or answering something none of us could see. On the third morning, I woke to find Poe's side of the tent empty again. This time, I was truly worried. I searched near the tree line and found 2 snares about 100 meters from camp. Both had been deliberately destroyed. The cords were cut clean through. The stakes had been snapped in the middle. Around them were paw prints. They were cat-shaped and larger than my hand, with my fingers spread wide. Bare human footprints ran among them. In some places, the 2 kinds of tracks overlapped. In others, they continued side by side. Poe returned while I was crouched over the marks. He saw what I had found, but said nothing. He picked up his tool bag and started back toward camp. "Poe," I called. He stopped without turning around. "We should leave, today, right now." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Tomorrow, like we agreed. Stop being a coward," and he kept walking. I did not sleep that night. I listened to On and Ton breathing beside me. I listened to the fire consume itself, one branch at a time. The forest had gone wrong. There were no insects, no night birds, no frogs calling from the stream, only a silence no living forest should ever make. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Poe move inside the tent. Through a narrow gap in the zipper, I watched him crawl outside as quietly as he could. I followed. By the time I emerged, Poe was standing in the center of camp, staring toward the trees. A shape waited at the edge of the forest. This time, I saw it clearly. It was not a shadow. It was not a tree. It had the shape of a tall, thin person, standing perfectly still in the moonlight. But its eyes caught the light and glowed a faint green. No human eyes shine like that in the dark. I opened my mouth to shout, but no sound came out. It was more than fear. Something physical held me. The air seemed to tighten around my chest and crush the breath from my lungs. My legs would not move. The figure tilted its head. Then it raised one hand and pointed into the forest, and Poe began to walk. He moved calmly, without hurry or hesitation, like a man answering an appointment he had been expecting for years. The moment he vanished into the trees, my legs came back to me. I ran toward the forest, even as every instinct screamed at me to stop. Then I saw it. The figure was still there. It had not followed Poe. It stood beneath the largest tree, less than 2 meters away from me, waiting. I smelled it before I could see it clearly. The raw musk of an animal hung thick in the air, not human sweat, but wet fur, primitive and damp. Beneath it was the smell of fresh blood, and something faintly rotten, like meat left in the sun for a day. Then I heard it breathe, slow, deep, low. The sound came from a chest larger and heavier than any human chest. Moonlight slipped through the canopy, and I saw the body it was trying to wear. It stood upright like a person, but every proportion was subtly wrong. Its neck was a little too long, its shoulders sat too high, with muscles bunched where human muscles should not be. The fingers at its sides were too long for the hands they belonged to. Its skin stretched too tightly across its bones. It looked like a human body, assembled by something that had studied us for 100 years, but had never been one of us. It tilted its head and looked at me, slowly, farther than any human neck should turn. A sound rose from deep in its throat. It was not speech. It was not a growl. It existed somewhere between the two, and every hair on my arms rose at once. Those green eyes fixed on mine. In that instant, I knew it was reading something inside me, judging who I was, deciding why I had come. I did not move. I did not breathe. I stopped thinking. Then it turned toward the direction Poe had gone. Its first step sounded nothing like a human footfall. It was heavier, lower, and strangely soft. The deliberate press of a broad paw against the forest floor. Not a heel, not a boot. Something else. Its shadow slipped between the trees. Then there was silence. I stood alone at the edge of the forest, my legs shaking, not only from fear. I had just understood why it had not come for me. I had not entered the forest to harm anything. I woke on and Ton immediately. We began searching as soon as the sky started to brighten. About 200 meters from camp, we found Poe's tool bag at the base of a large tree. Every trap had been removed and arranged in a neat row on the ground, as if someone had taken them out one by one and placed each with deliberate care. Poe's folding knife lay in the center, still closed, but Poe was gone. The bark of the surrounding trees had been scored with claw marks, 4 deep, clean lines, more than 2 meters above the ground. We shouted his name until our voices broke. Then we ran to the park station for help. Park rangers and volunteers searched for 4 days. They found enormous paw prints in several places. Deep in the forest, they found one area that smelled of blood. They found no body, no belongings, nothing that could tell us where Poe had gone. The search leader asked what my friend had been doing in the forest. I told him everything. The traps, the pangolin, the figure at the tree line, the footprints in the earth. He listened without the slightest surprise. Then he said, "There is something in this forest the rangers have known for a long time. People who come here to poach almost never walk out on their own. The forest knows why you came." I did not ask him to explain. I was not sure I wanted the answer. I had heard stories of the suea since I was a child, a tiger that gathers power for 100 years until it can take human form. It lures away those who have wronged the forest, draws them beyond the sight of witnesses, and then returns to what it truly is. I do not know what I saw that night, but I know its smell, wet fur and fresh blood. It still finds me in my dreams, and whenever I smell the forest after heavy rain, it returns without warning. I know what the forest did to the man who came there to harm it, and I know I was lucky that night, because I had not